Hi everyone, today I want to talk about different configuration items and files available in the Prancer framework. It would be an interesting video because we are going deep into the design of the platform and how it works in the most basic components parts. So let's get started. So we have the Prancer platform at the heart of the application, or let's say Prancer framework here. There are different configuration files available. Let's start from the connector. And the connector is being used to connect to different providers. Those providers could be a cloud provider or a Git provider. So the connector has enough information to connect to those external API providers. For example, in case of the Git repository, it's like the address of the Git repository, the user, the branch name, or in case of the cloud, the way that we want to connect to the cloud, the IAM user secrets and those kind of information. So now let's say we have a cloud here, or we could have a Git repository. The cloud could be any cloud that's being supported by Prancer, and also the Git repository. So the connector can connect to these external providers. We have another kind of configuration file. It's called master snapshot configuration file. Let's put it here. In the master snapshot configuration file, we have the type of resources that we want to connect to. For example, let's say in the case of the Azure, we can say we want to get all the virtual machines, we want to get all the VNets or all the security groups. So we are talking about the type of the resources. Or in case of a Git, we can say we want to get all the JSON files, all the YAML files, all the Terraform files. These are the type of resources that we are looking for and put the detail inside the master snapshot configuration file. Then inside the Prancer framework, we have a crawling engine. There is a crawler feature. And this crawler uses the connector to connect to an external provider. And then based on the configuration that we have in the master snapshot config file, can find those resources inside the external provider and generate another file which is called snapshot configuration file. So in the snapshot config file, we have individual resources. That's the difference between a master snapshot config file and a snapshot config file. On the master snapshot config file, we have the type of resources that we want to get the information. But in the snapshot config file, we have individual resources. As an example, in the master snapshot config file, I can ask for all the virtual machines, anything which the type is virtual machine, and then the crawler can connect to the external provider and then crawl all the virtual machines available in these environments and then generate the snapshot config file and say, okay, we have like 10 virtual machines, VM number 1, VM number 2, up to VM number 10. Or in case of Git for the IaC, the crawler can connect to a Git repository with the information that we have in the connector, and in the master snapshot config file, we can ask for all the YAML files, and then crawler find all the individual YAML files in the Git repository and then generate snapshot config file for individual files that we have. The next part is related to the test and compliance test. So we can tell we have a master test file, and in this master test file we are putting enough information to run the test against the type of resources that we have. Back to our example, the virtual machine. In the master test file, we can say we want to test all the virtual machines and understand if they're using a public IP address. Or in case of security group, we can tell we want to test all the security groups and understand if they are using port 22 as an allowed inbound connection. So these are all in the master test file. And because it's possible also that we have like just the individual resources rather than the type of resources, we have another kind of configuration file available, which is called test file. Okay, the test file is related to individual resources. When you are using the crawling feature, we are not using the test file, but if you are using individual resources rather than the crawling features, then you should put the test file here for individual tests. And these are like two other items that we have. On the Prancer framework, we have a compliance engine. After we have the snapshot config file, which we have the individual resources in, then the compliance engine can read the snapshot config file items and then connect to the external provider with the use of the connector and find out the resources that are addressed in the snapshot config file, get the configurations out of those files, convert those configurations into JSON format, and then put it in the database or in the file system based on the configuration that we have. So we will have like a, let's say, like a folder, and in this folder we have all the snapshots of the resources. So one more time, the workflow would be: first, the crawler connect to an external provider and find out all the individual resources that are available there based on the master snapshot config file. Then the compliance engine connect to these individual resources, get the configuration out of those systems, convert it to a JSON document, and put it in a snapshot folder. So here we have all the resources available in the cloud or the Git, but in the JSON format. And then we run the test and the compliance on these snapshots based on the master tests that are available. We start to run the test and understand if those resources are compliant or if they're not. And then after completing all of this process, we are generating an output file. And this output file contains the report that we're looking for. If the resources compliance test, if it's passed or if it's failed, and what resources are failed and the reason. So all the details of the reporting that we need available in the output file. And as you can see, we can run this process as many times as we want. We can do crawling and compliance tests based on the changes that we will have on the cloud. All of these configurations and output files we are putting in a container. We call it a collection. So this would be one of our collections. Collection could have different usages. For example, we can have collection based on each project that we have. We can have collection based on each customer, based on each business unit. So it depends on you. How do you want to interpret the collection in your own business area? But basically what collection means, it's like a folder that contains all of these items. And in the Prancer framework, it's possible that you have multiple collections. For example, we can have one collection for our Azure, the other collection for AWS, the other collection for our GitHub repository, the other collection for a specific project in the Git. And also in each collection, we can have multiple connectors, multiple snapshot config files, and multiple master test files. So it's not just like that we have only a single file for each type that you can see here. So it gives you a very powerful feature to be able to scale out your security implementation based on the Prancer framework. If you are doing like a normal test, usually the test cases are inside the master test file and also the test file. But also, as you know, Prancer framework supports the Rego test cases. In that case, we have also the Rego files available in the same collection. For example, if we have like 100 test cases based on the Rego, we have also the files available in the same collection. And that's usually the way people working with Prancer framework and do the compliance test. But let's think about the scenario that you have multiple collections, but you want to be able to centralize the management of your test files, your Rego files, and also your snapshot files. It is possible that you put all of these items in a remote Git. So let's say we have a remote Git repository and we can move these items to the remote Git repository and also the master test files, also the Rego files. Usually we don't need test files as we talked. And manage these items in a centralized Git repository. And here in our collection, we just have a file for these items pointing to that remote Git. So we will have a master snapshot config pointer and also master test file config pointer. This pointers file will point to the remote Git to read the information, and it gives us the ability to do the policy as code and centrally manage the master test file, Rego files, and also the master snapshot configuration files. The process would be the same. The crawler starts to do the crawling based on the connector connecting to a remote environment, but instead of having a local master snapshot, connects to a remote Git and then read the information from that master snapshot config file. And at the time of testing, the compliance engine connect to a remote master test file and remote Rego files rather than local files. But everything else like the snapshots and output will be stored in the local collection that we have. That's it. I hope it's useful for you, and now you understand what are the configuration files available for you. These scenarios we have in our Hello World application, and I will put the link to the Hello World application, also our remote repository for the compliance engine, all the Rego files, and also the Prancer framework itself, so you can check it later. Thank you and have a good day.